Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much. Looks like we're live on Facebook. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Katya Samadurov. I am a community outreach specialist on our diversity, equity, and inclusion team in Northern California. I'm based out of San Francisco, and I'm joined today by a longtime volunteer and community educator, Jean Giramonti, and one of our community partners from Open House, Ephraim Getahun. So I will hand it over to them to say a little bit about themselves before we get started with our discussion today. Jean, would you mind saying a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Katya. Welcome, everybody. My name again is Jean Giramonti. I'm joining you from my home in Santa Rosa up in Sonoma County, California. And as Katya said, I'm a volunteer community educator with the Alzheimer's Association and also a recent member of the chapter board for Northern California and Northern Nevada. And I'm connected to the Alzheimer's Association and to the disease through my late husband's journey through Alzheimer's, in which he passed away in 2018, and I was his primary caregiver during the 7 years that he battled the disease. So I'm happy to be with you, and welcome.
Thank you, Jean. Thanks for being here today. And Ephraim, will you say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Ephraim Getahun. My pronouns are he, him. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Training at Open House, which is the LGBT Senior Center here in San Francisco, Ramaytush Ohlone land. And, you know, my relationship with Alzheimer's actually comes from a clinical source, from a nursing background for around a decade before I entered into this more non-clinical role with Open House, which is a multi-tier service provider for all things aging and housing and community for the several thousand LGBTQ older adults that we serve here in San Francisco. So I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you so much. We are really excited to be having this conversation today as a part of Pride Month to highlight some of our community partners' work, as well as the work that our amazing volunteers and staff are doing here in Northern California. So just before we get started, if you're tuning in, we always like to start out by reminding folks that we're here for you if you need us anytime, 24/7 on our helpline, 800-272-3900. And throughout our conversation today, Michelle, who's behind the scenes, will be dropping some resources into the comments section. So we're here for you on our helpline and also on our website at alz.org/NorCal. Excuse me. So to start off our conversation today, I wanted to share and highlight some facts and figures about the LGBTQ community. So we know that age is the greatest risk factor for Alzheimer's and other dementias, and an estimated 2.7 million LGBTQ people are now over the age of 50. LGBTQ individuals living with Alzheimer's and other dementias face unique disease-related challenges, including 40% report their support networks have become smaller, 34% live alone, 40% say their health providers do not know their sexual orientation, and up to 30% experience lower rates of access to care. So we know that LGBTQ community has greater health disparities, many of which are risk factors for dementia, including depression, lower rates of preventative screenings, perhaps from avoiding the healthcare system for fear of discrimination, cardiovascular disease, and HIV/AIDS. So we know that there are certain unique barriers that our community faces to accessing care. But we also know that our community has a history of coming together in challenging times. And we see this when a community member develops Alzheimer's and dementia. And the LGBTQ community often turns to their family of choice to get them through these difficult times. So we wanted to talk a little bit about that and I might turn it over to Jean to maybe share a little bit of your experience with when you were a caregiver and reaching out to your chosen family for help.
Thank you, Katya. Yes, and if there's one recommendation that I can start out with, if you're in a position of being a caregiver, whether it's Alzheimer's or dementia or any other health condition for which you might find yourself in a brand new role of caregiving, the best advice I can give you, which was not what I did, but that is to ask for help soon, especially in areas of dementia, because it is a progressive disease. Each day is going to become a new challenge as the disease progresses. And you know, a lot of us, especially in some of us older LGBTQ folks, have learned throughout our lives to be more self-reliant because we've either been unable or unwilling to reach out to members of the broader community because of our status as a discriminated against minority. So, you know, we have built in mechanisms for reaching out to our own community. Some of us have very supportive families, and that's great. Or some of us have supportive families, but we've moved far away from them, or we have the distance factor. So we again try to rely on the network of our own community. Now, you know, we all have our individual sense of being out or not out. We might be out in some circles, we might not be out in others, especially with employment. And so the advice I give in terms of asking for help is to, again, do it soon and use your built-in network, whatever degree that is, and be specific when you ask for help, especially if someone can't be alone. Like my husband, as his disease progressed, was unable to be alone because he would fall or he would, you know, get in trouble in the kitchen. Or so to have people staying at the house while I was at work, because I was still working for much of that time, you know, became a challenge. And I ultimately did have to pay for outside help because I wasn't always successful in getting my friends to come in and pitch in, because either they were uncomfortable or they were working and they didn't have time. So there are all kinds of reasons why getting help can be a real challenge. But my advice is to not let those barriers get in your way. And lastly, the Alzheimer's Association is a huge, huge support. My husband and I were able to join support groups, which was immensely helpful, not to mention all of the other resources that the association was able to guide us to. And that really is the foundation of why I decided to give back after I retired, to give back to the association as a volunteer community educator. So I'll just say one more thing about my being at work. You know, I was out at work, but I found that there were a lot of disparities in how I was treated. I was treated differently, for example, if I needed time off than parents having, you know, children issues. So we get put in a different light sometimes when we do ask for help, and we just have to be persistent in that effort. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jean. Yeah, I know sometimes, you know, when we think of asking for help, it can feel uncomfortable to maybe feel like you're asking for something that might burden a friend or a family friend. But you know, I know we've talked about how sometimes actually what happens when you do reach out and ask for help is that friends, they want to, they feel good about being able to help in some way, and providing some tangible things that people would be able to help out with, for example, helping with meals, or I know that we have a resource on our website that's a care team calendar. We have a few different options that can be helpful for making those asks. So I think Michelle will put some of those in the comments, put a link to that.
You can also use a calendar is helpful. If you send out a digital calendar to everybody that might be a potential helper, and you just, mark some days and time slots and ask people to choose one. That seems to be a good way to go as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, what's so great about having a chosen family is I think people are always willing to help out when they know that there's ways that they can, alleviate some of that caregiver stress. And we also have a caregiver support group. We've partnered with Open House. Prior to the pandemic, this support group was meeting in person in San Francisco. And since it's been on Zoom, it's now opened for the entire chapter across Northern California and Northern Nevada. So we will put a link to our LGBTQ caregiver support group information also in the comments. And we're so grateful to be able to work with Open House to be able to provide that resource to caregivers. Ephraim, do you want to say a little bit more about Open House and our partnership with Open House and some of the work that you do?
Sure. Thank you so much, Katya. And Jean, what an incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing, because that piece about asking for help is, I love how you said, do as I say, not as I do, because I know it's a little bit more difficult, but that asking for help comes from, the work that's been built into the community, so that trust and, genuine connection has already been established so that you can be vulnerable in those moments. And I think cisgender heterosexual community members out there have a lot to learn from our community about the ways that we've really creatively designed and filled in the gaps of, when our families have just not been able to show up or stay connected because of who we are. And so I really encourage all the straight people out there, go find a friend that happens to be a part of the LGBTQ community. And there's so much you can learn about the networks that we establish to really hold one another and those that we love in these kinds of moments. So that's just one point that I wanted to make. As far as the LGBTQ caregivers of those with dementia, this is a support group that's been going on for a few years in partnership with the Alzheimer's Association. It used to obviously be in person before the pandemic, and now it's virtual. The aspect of it becoming virtual is actually a godsend, not the pandemic, the virtual element, because we're asking caregivers to set time aside to come into a space. You're asking them to oftentimes coordinate someone to maybe support some caregiving in that absence. And there are people all across the country that, we in San Francisco are living in a very resource-rich city that has lots of options and resources. There are many parts of this country that do not have that privilege. And so for people to be able to kind of jump in and be able to be connected with other LGBTQ people who happen to be caregivers is really, really powerful. And I think what's really special about the support group is that, while best practices and tangible resources and all of that is really great for people to walk away from, it's an honest space where people can just be fully authentic about how ugly this disease can be. And I think, giving people a space to just speak to the ugly aspects, really address the anticipatory grief that accompanies a diagnosis, just allowing just the realness to be in the room is so freeing, and just half of that healing aspect of that support group. And so we really encourage anyone who's LGBTQ and happens to be a caregiver. You could be caring for a parent, for a spouse, for a sibling. It doesn't really matter who it is that you are caring for that happens to have dementia or Alzheimer's. We really encourage you to come and engage with the support group. And I think one other point I just want to make, because you had spoken to the fact that age is the greatest risk factor for Alzheimer's, and it's really, no individual just happens to be one identity, right? I really am so privileged to be in a generation where the horizons around aging and even dying, there's a lot of hope. Maybe not from the planet perspective, God knows what happens from the climate era, but as far as science and resources and medicine, there is really, a great future around aging and dying well and successfully. But no single person, I'm not just going to become an old person. I'm also will become an old person who happens to be Black and who happens to be queer. And there's a really profound statistic that I just want to throw out there, where in less than 8 years, in the year 2030, we will see 40% of Alzheimer's diagnoses sitting at the feet of Black and Latinx community members. And it's really interesting to think about how intersections, the more identities an individual happens to hold, the further that it exacerbates the potential for a specific diagnosis. You know, we're talking about where they happen to live or the access to food. And we all know the preventative aspects are so much easier than the reactive types of medicine with Alzheimer's and dementia. And just, so I'll leave it at that. I know I'm kind of taking up a lot of your time, so.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad you are able to bring that up and share that statistic. It really is shocking. And it's important, I think, for everyone to be aware of. You know, a lot of us work in the aging space, and many of us maybe tuning in today are accessing our services because they might be a caregiver themselves. But another project we are working on is that the Alzheimer's Association partners with Open House on is training, you know, to kind of bring awareness and raise awareness to healthcare, the healthcare community and the medical community who might not be aware of some of these intersectional issues and the, you know, layers of marginalization that can really impact an individual's experience. So, you know, we work on cultural humility and sensitivity trainings on our LGBTQ dementia care project. And I know we've talked about how even in progressive areas and, you know, resource rich areas like Northern California, it's still important for our healthcare workers to provide kind of these updates and to get that perspective and lived experience. So do either one of you have examples of you know, maybe why it's so important to talk about some of the discrimination that the LGBTQ community has historically experienced from the medical community or healthcare workers? Do any of you have any examples to share about that?
I do. Thanks, Katya. And let me thank Ephraim also for that really eloquent discussion, especially about the importance of support groups. I don't know how I would have survived without being a part of a support group, because that was a place where I could really, you know, be completely honest about my feelings, about my mistakes. We could laugh together about, you know, the challenges that we screwed up on, trying to do the best for our partners as possible. As far as what we faced in the medical community, I saw both sides. Now, the fact that Art and I had been out for so many years, you know, it was just natural for us to be open about that with whomever we encountered. We were lucky to have a primary care physician who was very sensitive to our needs. But when it came to the time where, well, especially emergency room visits, which become more frequent with someone with Alzheimer's, because either they have a perceived ailment that can't be explained, or they have a real ailment or accident or something. Emergency rooms were always challenging, even in this bubble we call the Bay Area, where we have a progressive community about us, generally speaking, compared, like Ephraim said, with other parts of the country. But emergency rooms would not allow me to necessarily go back into the department to be with Art. And even after explaining that he had dementia and couldn't communicate as effectively for himself. So I had to sort of, you know, push my way or fight my way into those situations. And there were times when we were out of town, when we had a emergency room visit, and that became real clear that there was not a comfort level with us as a gay couple. And then the other example I have is when it came time to actually move Art into a residential care facility, I went about doing my research and visiting various facilities. And it became real clear that not all of them had any clue, you know, how to incorporate an LGBTQ plus person into their environment. So fortunately, I was able to find a smaller residential care facility near our home at that time in San Rafael. And that, was a real godsend for us. But you just don't know what you're going to face. And that's why, as Katya said, these trainings for the healthcare professionals is so critical.
Yeah, thank you for, go ahead, Ephraim.
Oh no, I was just giving an because that was powerful. I mean, I can add that, it's not, we're in San Francisco and we still have to, kind of metastasize ourselves into the existing infrastructure to beg these networks, whether it's long-term care facilities, it could be clinicians, you name it, really anywhere there's an intersection between aging and any kind of service, to really examine what the barriers are that for people to be able to access those services. And I think most commonly, I don't think the infrastructure recognizes how arduous the work is to transform to be inclusive to communities that happen to be LGBTQ. Because what ends up happening is there's going to be a lot of turning over of rocks and finding nothing. But that going through your enrollment process, examining the bureaucracy about the types of people that can come and see a specific person. I was alive when gay marriage was legalized. And while marriage isn't something that necessarily really is something I'm excited about, I recognize the very real, tangible legal protections it provides people, and just like what Jean was talking about. And so, there was a long-term care facility in San Francisco that I know is inclusive, that I know does a really good job of really trying to center LGBTQ older adults. And they still had an elder that had to hide, and they didn't realize until this person had passed away that he was queer. And so it's just remarkable to not only think about the very overt types of yes, we are homophobic, but there's systems that there's a perception that you have to combat. It's not just enough that the assumption of inclusivity is there. You have to, as an organization, as a long-term care facility, service provider, doctor, go above and beyond to show, because the perceived persecution and the persecution both come with the same result, which is people not engaging with your service because they're afraid. And so there's something really powerful when, you're recognizing people's pronouns, or offering your pronouns when you're introducing yourself to a trans client. We're thinking about LGBTQ people that don't want to engage with long-term care facilities or clinicians, but then we think about trans elders that, during the AIDS crisis, people were not even being, nurses weren't even entering specific rooms because gay men might have been dying of AIDS and trans women were dying out in the street. So you're asking people that have been so harmed by these systems to now turn around and be like, oh yes, of course I'm going to come and engage. That historical memory and that trauma, it's actually passed down even to those of us that were not even, our essence wasn't even conceived yet. And we've adopted these same fears from these systems because of the experiences of our elders. And so it's just something to consider. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Historical context, I think, is really important for us all to remember. What our elders have lived through, and we've come a long way, and we still have a long way to go. And I'm glad you mentioned just the power of something as simple as using your pronouns and creating a space, even as a cisgendered person, creating a space for transgender folks to be able to share their pronouns and just affirming their identity, affirming their humanity. And another thing that seems like just such a simple gesture, but having rainbow materials and in your space is actually, I think, carries a lot of power when we know that folks who have a long history of kind of scanning a space to see if it's a safe space for them, or to see if it's going to feel like they can show up as their authentic self. Something as having rainbow inclusive materials actually can go a long way. And we only have a couple of minutes left, about 5 minutes left. So I think Michelle is going to add some resources that we have about some tips and guidelines for using your pronouns. She will add those into the comments. And Before we conclude our discussion, I know that a lot of times we talk about a lot of the challenges and specific needs that the LGBTQ community faces, but since it's Pride Month, I thought it would be really great to also share some examples of celebration or joy or pride that we have experienced either personally or in our work this month. I'll hand it over to you.
I'll say that so far it's been a great month so far. I've actually delivered a few educational programs in person for a change to a couple different LGBTQ plus groups up here in Sonoma County. But the highlight for me so far was being in the Alzheimer's Association contingent in our Sonoma County Pride Parade a couple of weeks ago. And we had a really big turnout. For those of you who know who Amy Schneider is, the fantastic, Jeopardy champion earlier this year, she was our grand marshal. I think she helped draw a lot of the extra people that came. But the joy for me was getting the response from the people lining the street and giving us, the heart sign or the thumbs up sign or the prayer sign, all in appreciation for what the association is doing to reach out to our community. So that for me was a joyous occasion.
That's awesome. Were you able to introduce yourself to Amy or?
Oh, that was my disappointment, because by the time we got to the plaza, it was so jam-packed. I couldn't find her, and I never did get to go shake her hand and tell her what a huge Jeopardy fan I am.
Yeah.
I'll find her sooner or later.
Thank you, Jean. And then I think for me, my greatest joy right now is that Open House plus Unlock have just opened the first LGBTQ Adult Day program in the country. It's called Open House plus Unlock Community Day Services. It's right here on Laguna, and it's we've taken over the block between our offices. We have housing units. We have more housing units coming. And so really we're designing this thread of continuity in our elders being able to live, age, and die in the communities that they built. And so this aspect of really, the Adult Day program supports folks just because of the natural aging process might need some extra support. It offers reprieve for caregivers who 24 hours a day. We cannot forget the economic weight that sits at the feet of caregivers, $70 billion worth of caregiving hours that caregivers are doing over yearly, right? So it's just offering a space to be the, figurative children to our elders, where the traditional family structure would be doing this anyway, where children care for their aging elders. And so it's just really special to have these doors open. We're so excited. If you want to learn more, you can check out the website. You can reach out to me for any referrals for any older adults that you think might benefit from the program. And we're just thrilled as our elders walk in here. It just, the staff, myself, we're just regularly just in tears to see a reflected community caring for the community. And it's just so special. So we're just blessed to be a part of this incredible project with Unlock.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really exciting and really exciting to have a model that might be able to be replicated elsewhere.
Yes.
And I think Michelle is kind of just dropping some more resources. She's going to put the information on the Open House and Unlock Community Day Center in the comments. Also, we have some other resources from the LGBT Aging Center and Sage's National Resource Center. June is also Alzheimer's Brain Health and Awareness Month. So we can put a resource in the comments on 10 ways to love your brain. And I wanted to just finally mention that in addition to all of our caregiver support and resources and education, we also have early stage support groups. It looks like Michelle wanted me to mention that we also have support group for people with a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's or dementia. So you can browse all of our resources on alz.org/CRF, our community resource finder, and 24/7 on our helpline at 800-272-3900. Thank you both so much, Jean and Ephraim. I've really enjoyed this conversation. You're both amazing. Happy Pride, everyone, and thank you for watching, and we hope to see you next month on our next Facebook Live.